When tragedy strikes in the skies, it usually unites the aviation industry around one grim goal: to find out what went wrong and keep it from happening again. But the recent Midair collision near Washington, D.C. was different. 67 people lost their lives, and before investigators could fully comb through the debris, President Trump stepped to the podium and linked the disaster to diversity initiatives at the Federal Aviation Administration. That bold claim, delivered with no direct evidence, sparked a media firestorm.
I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't.
On the one hand, the president and his allies argued that inclusive hiring weakens critical roles by forcing underqualified candidates into life-or-death positions. On the other hand, aviation experts insisted that rigorous standards remain firmly in place, pointing to deeper structural issues. So which side is right? And do we risk missing the real causes of tragedies like this by chasing politically charged explanations? The controversy has triggered questions that rattle the core of American aviation and, perhaps more importantly, challenge us to examine whether focusing on diversity is a distraction or a necessary evolution. It was supposed to be a standard approach into Reagan National Airport. Commercial flights use the route daily, and military helicopters also frequent the area. Yet for reasons still under investigation, a helicopter and a passenger jet occupied the same airspace at the same time, colliding in midair. The aftermath was immediate and horrific. Debris rained down over the Potomac River, and 67 souls were lost in an instant. Investigations typically start with mechanical checks, radar data, and cockpit recordings. Was the chopper off its assigned path? Did the pilot of the jet misinterpret instructions? Or did air traffic controllers provide conflicting signals? Early statements from the FAA and the National Transportation Safety Board indicated they were working through the raw data, emphasizing that no conclusions had been drawn. That's when the White House briefing took an unexpected turn. President Trump waved a printout of a news story citing the FAA's outreach to individuals with disabilities and argued that common sense dictated diversity quotas must be at fault. While the press braced for details about black boxes or radar logs, the debate shifted to whether inclusive hiring creates dangerous cracks in the system. Shortly afterward, a number of aviation experts publicly challenged the idea that inclusive hiring had any bearing on the crash. Among them was Bill McGee, a senior fellow focusing on travel and aviation, who has an FAA dispatcher license. His main point: if you're controlling flights, you must pass the same rigorous tests, no matter who you are. A broader talent pool might welcome more women, more minorities, or people with disabilities, but it doesn't erase FAA certification standards. McGee and others emphasized the real problems plaguing U.S. aviation: decades of underfunding, a shortage of air traffic controllers, and outdated oversight frameworks that can't keep pace with industry demands. They warned that fixating on diversity quotas detracts from the real conversation about how the FAA is structured, how big companies like Boeing are overseen, and how new technologies must be integrated. Beyond the white-hot spotlight on DEI stands a mountain of evidence that the FAA has long been understaffed. Reagan National Airport's airspace alone is notoriously complex, and staffing that location with seasoned controllers has proved challenging. Critics point to the fact that many towers nationwide operate short-handed, creating a stressful work environment ripe for human error, regardless of who's sitting at the console. Furthermore, the agency's oversight of large manufacturers has come under fire. The Boeing 737 MAX disasters from a few years ago exposed how the FAA delegated certain critical checks back to Boeing, a scenario that compromised objective evaluations. In those tragedies, no one blamed diversity programs for the flawed flight control software. Instead, experts cited insufficient oversight and profit-driven scheduling pressures. Now, with the new collision near Washington, some see the administration's anti-DEI stance as a politically convenient scapegoat. After all, it's simpler to accuse diversity hires of undermining safety than to reckon with underfunding, lobbying influences, and insufficient inspector capacity that might require expensive long-term solutions. If the FAA's stability seemed uncertain before, Elon Musk's recent disputes with the agency only added fuel to the fire. Upset over fines against his SpaceX program, Musk reportedly forced the early resignation of FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker. In an industry that relies on continuity and impartial oversight, losing its top official midterm underscores the turmoil. President Trump swiftly named Christopher Rosello, a 22-year FAA veteran, as the new administrator.
I'm also immediately appointing an acting commissioner to the FAA, Christopher Rosello, a 22-year veteran of the agency, highly respected. Christopher, thank you very much.
Observers question whether such a quick shakeup benefits safety or merely appeases powerful voices. After all, if a billionaire can tilt agency leadership, what does that say about the FAA's independence or its power to say no to well-connected entities, even if public safety is on the line? Meanwhile, the conversation around who should fill staff positions in towers and cockpit roles continues to rage. Is calling for the best and brightest an earnest push for excellence, or a veiled suggestion that those who come from certain demographic backgrounds or who have disabilities could never meet those standards? By now, you might wonder, does fixating on diversity deflect attention from the legitimate systemic flaws that contribute to accidents? Should we be alarmed that one of the world's most advanced aviation systems is caught in rhetorical crossfire rather than devoting full energy to proven safety solutions? There's also the question of what best and brightest truly means. If a candidate, regardless of race, background, or disability, proves capable through standard exams and training, does that degrade safety? Or is it possible that broadening the pool of applicants could bring fresh problem-solving perspectives to an industry that desperately needs innovation? Critics of the White House stance argue that scapegoating diversity distracts from tasks like overhauling outdated radar systems, expanding air traffic controller training pipelines, and strengthening the FAA's oversight power. Yet it's worth considering that some policymakers genuinely believe hiring based on any criteria beyond test scores opens the door to less qualified staff. Could there be a middle path that upholds rigorous standards while ensuring no capable applicant is overlooked? In the midst of heartbreak and confusion, politics collided with aviation policy in a way that left many uneasy. While investigators analyzed flight data and radar logs to determine if miscommunication or mechanical failure caused the crash, the blame game zeroed in on DEI.
The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan, which says diversity is integral to achieving FAA's mission of ensuring safe and efficient travel. I don't think so. I think it's just the opposite.
Even now, it's unclear whether any part of the collision involved controller mistakes, pilot decisions, or something else entirely. So where does this leave us? It's tempting to pick a side, either condemning the White House for diverting attention with unfounded accusations, or embracing the argument that lowered standards put all our lives at risk. Perhaps a more revealing approach is to ask ourselves a few tough questions. Could focusing on diversity overshadow the true systemic breakdowns that lead to tragedies? Is the phrase best and brightest just code for exclusion, or does it speak to genuine concerns about competence? Does a bigger applicant pool, subjected to the same rigorous testing, really create a safety gap, or might it help solve chronic staff shortages? Is the aviation industry benefiting from bold steps toward inclusivity, or is it falling into a political tug-of-war that undermines public trust? Ultimately, no verdict on diversity initiatives will bring back the 67 people who lost their lives in a split second above the Potomac. But perhaps this debate offers a critical lesson. Real safety reform demands more than reactive blame. It calls for a fearless look at staffing, technology, and governance, while leaving no stone unturned, including the merits and limits of DEI itself. If the American aviation system wants to remain a world leader, maybe it's time to weigh what truly keeps planes in the air: dedicated professionals armed with adequate resources and a determination to get every flight right. Only by wrestling with these broader issues and letting the facts speak for themselves can we honor the victims and strengthen the foundation of air travel for everyone who steps aboard.